When the human whispered, "You're beautiful," the alien woman froze. When the human whispered, "You're beautiful," the alien woman froze. The human ship, Aurora's Reach, moved silently through the cold void of space, its sleek hull glinting faintly against the distant light of a dying blue star. Inside, the crew worked quietly, the hum of the engines the only sound breaking the stillness. Humanity had prepared for first contact for decades, running simulations, learning alien languages, and anticipating hostility. But nothing in the training could have prepared them for the alien station that loomed ahead. It was not massive or armed like a military outpost. It was elegant, almost organic, with smooth curves and flowing lines that seemed to float in zero gravity. It was alive in a way humans were only beginning to understand. Lieutenant Eric Vale, the youngest officer on the mission, watched from the observation deck as the station rotated lazily in its orbit. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from awe. Every detail, the shimmer of the metallic surface, the soft reflections of the star, the way the docking ports opened like petals, was mesmerizing. Humanity had dreamed of this moment for centuries, and now it was here. "Stay focused," Commander Rhea said quietly from behind him. Her voice carried authority but also something softer, a hint of anticipation. "We are diplomats, not invaders. Observe, learn, and survive. Nothing else matters." Eric nodded, though he could feel the tension in his chest. First contact missions were delicate, dangerous, and unpredictable, but he had a feeling, deep in his gut, that this encounter would be different. The docking procedure was smooth. The station's outer gates opened slowly, welcoming the human ship without aggression. Eric stepped into the airlock, the doors sliding shut behind him with a soft hiss. The interior of the station was astonishing. The walls were translucent, revealing the station's inner systems that glowed faintly like veins. The air smelled clean, almost like a forest after rain, a scent that seemed impossible in space. And then he saw her. She stood at the center of the docking chamber, unmoving yet commanding attention. She was tall, elegant, and impossibly graceful. Her skin had a faint metallic sheen, like polished copper kissed by sunlight. Her eyes were deep pools of color, constantly shifting, reflecting light in a way that made them feel alive. Eric had expected alien curiosity, perhaps even suspicion, but not this. This presence that seemed to fill the entire room. The alien woman's gaze met his briefly. She did not blink, did not shift. It was a stare that held centuries of discipline, knowledge, and restraint. Every human instinct screamed that she was dangerous, yet something about her seemed fragile, as if she were balanced on the edge of breaking. "She's the cultural observer," Commander Rhea whispered. "Her people communicate without words most of the time." "You must be careful, Eric. Do not provoke her, do not assume anything. She is not like us." Eric swallowed. "Understood." They approached slowly. The alien woman did not move aside. She simply watched, studying them with a level of scrutiny that felt invasive. Eric noticed small details others might miss. The way her hands were slightly curled at her sides, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the faint pulse at her temple that indicated heightened alertness. She was trained to control every motion, every reaction, yet something beneath the surface hinted at something more. "Greetings," Commander Rhea said formally. "I am Commander Rhea of the human vessel Aurora's Reach. We come in peace and seek to understand your people." The alien woman remained still. No words, no gestures, only the shifting of her eyes, almost imperceptible as she processed the communication. Her silence was profound, almost physical, and Eric felt a chill as he realized how little he truly understood her. Minutes passed, each one stretching into eternity. Eric's mind raced, thinking of the training, of the simulations, of every possible protocol. And yet none of it mattered now. There was no manual for this. Finally, in a moment that felt like a heartbeat stretching into forever, Eric did something completely unplanned. He stepped slightly forward, lowering his voice to a whisper. Not loud, not formal, just a human voice, soft and sincere. "You're beautiful." The words seemed to hang in the air, impossible and fragile. The alien woman froze. Every muscle in her body stiffened. Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time she blinked. It was a subtle motion, but it carried the weight of centuries of training, discipline, and emotional suppression. She froze so completely that even the automated systems in the room seemed to hesitate, as if sensing the anomaly. Eric immediately regretted the words. He had spoken without strategy, without reason, without thought. But he also couldn't look away. There was something in her response, something profoundly human and deeply alien all at once, that demanded attention. Commander Ria's hand hovered near her sidearm, tense but restrained. "Eric," she said sharply, "step back." But he did not. He could not. His eyes were locked on hers, trying to understand what had happened, what he had awakened. The alien woman's breathing shifted, almost imperceptibly. Her species had no words for fear, no words for surprise, and certainly no words for admiration. And yet, here she was, caught in a moment that her people had outlawed centuries ago. Compliments, recognition of beauty, personal admiration. These were dangerous, destabilizing, forbidden. And now she was experiencing it. Her superiors, monitoring through distant observation channels, began to react. Alarms blinked in the station's central core, subtle but urgent. Something unprecedented had occurred. An alien of her rank, her discipline, had been affected by something as simple and human as a compliment. Eric felt a pang of guilt but also fascination. He had not meant to provoke, to manipulate, or to control. He had simply spoken truth. And in doing so, he had done something far more powerful than any weapon in the human arsenal. The alien woman's stance softened just slightly, though only Eric seemed to notice. There was a flicker in her eyes, a hesitation that was almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. He could see the internal conflict, the clash between what she had been taught and what she was now experiencing. "She's never been exposed to this," Commander Ria whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the station's quiet hum. "Not like this." Eric wanted to speak again, to explain, to apologize, to reassure her, but he knew that words could make things worse. The moment was fragile, delicate as glass. Any misstep could shatter it completely. And then it happened. The alien woman's body trembled slightly. Not a violent reaction, not a sign of aggression, but a subtle, human-like flinch. It was a small crack in the armor she had worn all her life, a glimpse of the being beneath the discipline. Eric's heart raced. He had never seen anything so extraordinary, so beautiful, so terrifying. The crew began to whisper among themselves, careful not to disturb the fragile moment. Engineers checked systems, making sure the station was stable. Scientists watched, fascinated by the unexpected neurological response. And Eric stood frozen, unable to look away. For a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, the alien woman moved. Not toward him, not away, but a small, deliberate step to the side. Her eyes never left his, yet her body language said something entirely different. Uncertainty, curiosity, something that resembled trust. It was enough. Enough to show that the human voice, the simple act of recognition, had broken through centuries of conditioning. The rules of her society, the discipline instilled in her since birth, had faltered in the presence of sincerity. Commander Ria finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "We will proceed carefully. We cannot force understanding, only offer it." Eric nodded, still mesmerized. He realized with a mixture of pride and fear that something monumental had begun. A single whisper, a simple truth, had changed the course of this encounter forever. The alien woman, still frozen in thought, finally allowed herself to blink again. This time, it was not a reflex but a choice. A small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement of the human presence. It was subtle, but it carried a weight no words could measure. And as the human crew continued their cautious approach, Eric understood something he had never considered before. Humanity's strength was not just in technology, strategy, or diplomacy. It was in their sincerity, their ability to connect, to awaken feelings that others had long forgotten or suppressed. The alien woman, disciplined, reserved, and formidable, had experienced something her people had feared for generations. And in that experience, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the docking chamber lingered long after the human words had faded. The alien woman stood frozen, her mind a storm of confusion and fear. For centuries, her people had been trained to suppress all personal expression, to remove every trace of individual feeling from public and private life alike. She had spent decades mastering control over every thought and reaction, every flicker of emotion carefully contained. Yet now a single sentence, so small, so human, had disrupted that balance entirely. She was aware of the human observers, their subtle movements, the way their eyes followed her. She could feel their curiosity, their wonder, and even a measure of understanding. And it terrified her. No one in her life had ever witnessed her inner self. To allow even a hint of personal feeling to surface was dangerous. It was forbidden. It could destroy careers, families, reputations, even lives. In the quiet command center of her station, her superiors were already reacting. The council, an assembly of her species' most disciplined leaders, had sensors linked to every sector of the station. They saw the anomaly immediately. The human's whispered words, the way she froze, the micro-tremors in her neural response. Protocols were clear. Any uncontrolled emotional response must be corrected immediately. Failure to comply was intolerable. "She is compromised," one council member said, their voice clipped and unyielding, as if the word itself could contain the danger. "The human influence is destabilizing. Remove her from the contact immediately." Another shook their head, a rare display of uncertainty. "She has never reacted this way before. Nothing we trained her for should allow this. It is unprecedented." "Then it is a failure in her discipline. We cannot allow it to spread. Human influence must be contained. That is the only way to preserve order." Back in the docking chamber, the alien woman's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to retreat into the safety of control, but a new, unfamiliar force pulled her in a different direction. She was aware of the human lieutenant standing there quietly, watching her with eyes full of sincerity. There was no manipulation, no agenda, just a recognition of something she had never known existed, herself. Her species had a word for this feeling, but it had long since fallen into disuse. It was considered dangerous, a weakness, a path to chaos. Humans, by contrast, had a word for it: affirmation. And somehow just a single whisper of it had broken through centuries of rigid control. Commander Rhea stepped forward cautiously. "Lieutenant Vale," she said softly, "step back. We will give her space. This is delicate. We cannot force understanding." Eric obeyed, though his eyes never left her. There was something in her posture, in the way her body shifted imperceptibly, that told him she was experiencing the human presence in a way she had never been able to before. It was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. The alien woman's thoughts flickered back to her childhood, to the years of training, the relentless drills, the constant reminders that emotions were dangerous. Every compliment, every word of admiration, every trace of affection had been forbidden. Her entire existence had been built on control, on erasing the self in favor of duty and obedience. And yet, here she was, feeling something entirely alien, something human. She tried to push it away, tried to remind herself that a single word could not matter. That discipline was stronger than fleeting sensation, but she could not. The human voice had unlocked something, a tiny door in the labyrinth of her mind. And for the first time in her life, she wondered what it meant to truly exist for herself, rather than for her people's expectations. Back in the council chamber, Tension escalated. The sensors continued to record her responses, and every flicker of emotional activity was flagged as a potential threat. "Contain her," one council member ordered. "If she cannot control herself, the humans must be removed. They are dangerous." "But her reactions are unique," another countered. "They show potential for understanding, for connection. Perhaps there is a way to harness this without risking disaster." "Connection is weakness," the first member snapped. "You know the history. Empathy, affection, personal admiration, they led to collapse. Entire civilizations fell because they could not control themselves. We will not risk it again." The alien woman, unaware of the debate raging above her, began to take cautious steps. Each movement was deliberate, measured, as if she were testing the limits of her control. The human lieutenant remained still, giving her space, offering no judgment, no pressure. He simply observed, a constant and gentle presence that challenged every instinct she had ever known. She felt fear, yes, but also something else, something unfamiliar, warm, and unsettling. Could it be trust, or merely curiosity? She did not know, but she could feel it, and it terrified her as much as it intrigued her. The human crew, unaware of the full scope of the internal conflict within her species, continued their diplomatic procedures. Scientists scanned the station's architecture, noting the organic design, the integration of natural energy sources, the subtle balance of aesthetics and function. They documented every detail, every anomaly, but none of it compared to the anomaly in front of them. A living being, reacting to their presence in ways that defied logic, culture, and expectation. Eric found himself speaking again, carefully this time, his voice steady but gentle. "We mean no harm. We only wish to understand." The alien woman froze again, her sensors registering the phrase. Understanding was not a word her species used lightly. It implied consent, engagement, recognition of individuality. She had spent her life avoiding it, fearing it, and yet here it was offered freely without coercion. She did not know how to respond. Time seemed to stretch, each second filled with tension. The human crew remained patient, a silent demonstration of a quality her people had long abandoned: empathy. She had never encountered a species that valued patience and sincerity over protocol and control. And yet, in their calmness, she found herself questioning everything she had been taught. The Council's orders were becoming more urgent. She cannot remain in contact. If she resists, the human presence must be neutralized. But the alien woman hesitated. She was torn between duty and the inexplicable pull she felt toward these humans. Every instinct screamed for caution, for retreat, for absolute adherence to the rules. Yet another part of her, the part she had long denied, wanted to stay, to understand, to experience. Commander Rhea noticed the shift. "Lieutenant Vale," she said softly, "whatever happens, remain calm. Do not force her hand. She is discovering something important on her own." Eric nodded, though his heart pounded. He could sense the fragility of the moment, the razor's edge on which it balanced. He did not fully understand the consequences, but he knew that whatever happened next could change everything. The alien woman's thoughts wandered back to history lessons she had been forced to memorize. Tales of collapse, rebellion, and destruction caused by unchecked emotion. She had always dismissed them as cautionary stories, examples of what must never happen. But now, standing before these humans, she wondered if they had been warnings of potential rather than threats. Perhaps emotion was not weakness but power. Perhaps feeling could be a weapon, or a tool, or even a salvation. Her body trembled slightly, almost imperceptibly. She was aware of it, and it frightened her more than anything else. To tremble meant vulnerability. To tremble meant exposure. To tremble meant the human had broken through her defenses. And yet, she did not recoil. Eric felt the shift. It was subtle, like the first ripple of wind across still water. He understood that she was beginning to see him not as a threat, not as an alien observer, but as something else, something human, sincere, and real. In the council chamber, debate raged. "She is beyond control," one member said sharply. "Remove her, now." "No," another replied, quieter but resolute. "Do not destroy what is awakening. We may not understand it, but it is remarkable. Perhaps it is the path forward." Orders were sent, silently transmitted through the station's systems. Security units moved toward the docking chamber, prepared to enforce compliance. But the alien woman's hesitation had slowed their progress. She was aware of their approach, and yet she remained where she was, caught in the space between obedience and awakening. The human crew noticed the subtle tension in the room. Systems began to flicker, alarms muted but present. Eric's hand hovered near his communicator, ready for anything, but he remained calm. He had seen her hesitation, her curiosity, her fear, and most importantly, her potential to change. He understood that force would only escalate the situation. Only patience, sincerity, and presence could guide her. Finally, the alien woman took another step, this one slightly larger than before. Her movement was cautious, deliberate, and it carried with it a silent acknowledgement. She was beginning to choose. Not dictated by fear, not forced by protocol, but by her own emerging awareness. Eric felt a surge of hope. This was the moment, the turning point, the fragile first step towards something that could alter history. He understood, without words, that his species had a power unlike any weapon, the ability to awaken, to recognize, to connect. And as she continued to move, cautiously bridging the gap between obedience and curiosity, the council realized something terrifying. Humanity was not dangerous because of technology or armies, but because of sincerity, patience, and the unassuming power of recognition. The alien woman's eyes met Eric's once more. For the first time, she did not freeze. The moment was fleeting, delicate, but undeniable. She had begun to see not just him, but herself, and the possibility that her world did not have to be defined by fear alone. The humans continued their approach, careful but confident. Every step was measured, every word intentional yet simple. They did not push, they did not manipulate. They only existed, and in existing, they offered something the alien woman had never known: choice. And in that choice, the impossible began to happen. A single sentence, a whisper of beauty, had awakened something far greater than either species had anticipated. The alien woman's world had shifted. Every carefully constructed rule, every lesson in restraint, every warning of weakness had been challenged in a single moment. She could no longer pretend that nothing had happened, that the human whisper had not reached the deepest parts of her mind. And yet, the consequences of this awakening were beginning to ripple far beyond her personal struggle. Back in her society, the council was in turmoil. The initial reports from the docking station had been confusing, almost impossible to believe. One of their most disciplined operatives, a master of emotional suppression, had been affected by a human's simple words. They had expected resistance, perhaps defiance, but not recognition, not awakening. It was an anomaly unprecedented in their records, a threat to the very foundations of their culture. "We must act immediately," one council member insisted, pacing before the translucent chamber walls. "If this influence spreads, we risk the collapse of order. Her exposure to humans cannot be allowed to continue." Another member shook their head. "We cannot ignore what is happening. She is not simply compromised. Something is changing. She is beginning to experience emotions she has been denied all her life. And she is choosing to engage, not resist." "Choice is dangerous," the first member snapped. "History has shown that personal feelings lead to rebellion, to chaos, to destruction. If she continues on this path, the humans will destabilize our entire society. Neutralize her. Remove the threat." The alien woman felt the pressure of these forces even from the station. Every sensor, every surveillance channel, every whisper of council directive was a reminder of what she could lose. But she also felt something new, a quiet insistence within herself. The human had shown her something important, something she had never known: recognition, validation. And for the first time in her life, she wanted to understand it fully, even if it was dangerous. She moved carefully through the station corridors, her movements precise yet tentative, as if testing her own ability to act without falling back into rigid control. Eric Vale and the human crew followed at a measured distance, observing, learning, and most importantly, respecting her autonomy. They knew this was delicate. Force could break her, but patience, presence, and sincerity might guide her to a place even her own people had never allowed. The humans began to show her more of their ways. They shared images of their worlds, their lives, their art and music transmitted through the station systems. Each display was a small revelation, a window into a culture built not only on knowledge but also on connection, empathy, and appreciation. The alien woman's eyes absorbed every detail, her mind struggling to process feelings she had never been permitted to acknowledge. She began to notice subtle shifts within herself. Thoughts once dismissed as dangerous began to linger. Moments of curiosity sparked questions. Why did she feel warmth at the sound of a human melody? Why did the simple acknowledgement of her presence stir something deep inside her mind? And most importantly, why did she want to explore these feelings instead of suppressing them? Meanwhile, the council acted swiftly to contain the situation. Security units were deployed through remote channels, their directives clear: bring her back under control, limit exposure to humans, and prevent the spread of emotional influence. But even their technology struggled against the unpredictability of the human presence. The humans did not resist, did not attack, did not coerce, they only existed. And in existing, they created space for change. The alien woman realized that fear had been the foundation of her entire society. Every rule, every ritual, every law had been built to suppress sensation and maintain control. And yet, here were humans who lived without fear of emotion, who embraced it as strength rather than weakness. She began to question everything she had been taught. Could it be possible that her people had been wrong? That emotions were not a threat but a form of power? Eric noticed the subtle changes in her demeanor. Her posture, once rigid and formal, was becoming more fluid. Her gaze, once distant and analytical, now held curiosity and something almost like trust. And most importantly, she was beginning to act independently, making choices that were not dictated by protocol but by her emerging sense of self. One evening, as the blue star cast long shadows across the station, she finally spoke. Not in the clipped, formal language of her species, but in a hesitant, human-like cadence. "Why do you value this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why do you speak freely of beauty, of truth, of things that destabilize?" Eric stepped forward, keeping his tone gentle and calm. "Because we believe it matters. Because recognizing beauty, acknowledging truth, and expressing connection are what make us who we are. We do not hide from it. We embrace it." Her mind struggled to reconcile this with everything she had ever been taught. Embrace emotion. To embrace was to risk chaos, to risk failure, to risk being torn from the carefully ordered life she had known. And yet, the human's words resonated deeply. They awakened something she had long denied: the possibility of being more than a tool of her society. As days passed, the influence of the humans began to ripple through the station and beyond. Other members of her species observed her interactions, initially with suspicion, then with fascination. Small, almost imperceptible changes began to appear. A technician smiled briefly at a human joke. An engineer lingered over a human melody, curiosity evident in the tilt of their head. The council had warned that exposure to human emotion was contagious, and now it was happening. The alien woman felt both exhilaration and fear. She was aware that every choice carried consequences. One misstep could undo everything, not only for her but for the humans who had come in peace. And yet, she could not stop. She wanted to understand fully, to explore this uncharted territory within herself, to see what it meant to truly exist rather than simply obey. Arik observed her carefully, aware that patience was their greatest weapon. They did not need to coerce or manipulate. They only needed to remain present, offering a model of connection and trust that contrasted sharply with the alien society's rigid expectations. It became clear that this was not merely a personal awakening, it was a revolution in miniature. The Council's fears were justified, human influence was spreading. Their presence forced the alien society to confront something long suppressed, and yet the change was not violent. It was quiet, subtle, and unstoppable. The alien woman's thoughts returned to her childhood lessons, the stories of civilizations torn apart by unchecked emotion. She had always assumed that suppression was the only path to survival, and now she wondered if it had been fear, not wisdom, that had guided her people. Perhaps connection, choice, and recognition were not weaknesses but strengths. The human crew continued their cautious engagement, offering moments of shared experience. A story told, a melody played, an image of a distant world. Each act, though simple, carried profound meaning. The alien woman absorbed it all, her mind expanding in ways she could not have anticipated. And then came the moment that would change everything. The alien council, realizing the depth of the threat, decided to act directly. Security units were sent to the docking chamber, prepared to enforce compliance by any means necessary. But when they arrived, they found the human crew calm, the alien woman standing not in fear but in quiet defiance. She had made her choice. The humans did not fight. They did not attack. They only existed, offering presence and understanding. And in that presence, the alien woman realized that strength was not control but courage, the courage to feel, to choose, to awaken. The Council's units hesitated. They had never encountered a being capable of defying protocol so completely. Her calm, her resolve, her emerging sense of self disrupted their calculations. And for the first time, the Council considered the impossible. Perhaps emotion was not the enemy, but a force that could be wielded wisely. The alien woman turned to Arik, her voice steady now, though still tinged with wonder and fear. I want to learn. I want to understand this feeling, this recognition, this beauty. Arik smiled gently. Then we will teach you. We will not force you. We will not manipulate you. Only show you what it means to live, to feel, to exist. She felt a shiver run through her, a mix of exhilaration and fear. Her life, her society, her understanding of the universe, all had been built on suppression and control. And now a new path had opened, uncertain but filled with possibility. The humans and the alien woman began to work together, cautiously exploring the boundaries of knowledge, emotion, and connection. Each moment was a revelation, each shared experience a small victory against centuries of fear. And beyond the station, the ripples of their interactions began to spread, subtly influencing others in her society who were exposed to the human presence. History, she realized, might remember this differently. Not as a battle, not as a conquest, but as an awakening. The humans had arrived not to dominate or destroy, but to reveal what had been lost, hidden, or forbidden. And in that revelation, a new future began to take shape, one where choice, recognition, and connection could coexist with tradition, discipline, and responsibility. The alien woman took another step, fully conscious of the path she was choosing. She was no longer merely an observer or a tool. She was a participant, a being discovering her own power, her own agency, her own humanity, or at least, her own version of it. And for the first time in centuries, she felt something she had thought impossible: hope. The tension across the alien society was palpable. Reports from the docking station continued to stream in, and every council member, every official, every operative was aware that something unprecedented was happening. The alien woman, once the epitome of discipline and restraint, had begun to awaken to feelings that her people had long suppressed. And the humans, by simply existing, had shown her a new way of being, one that was powerful not in strength or weapons, but in connection, understanding, and choice. The council convened in emergency session, their translucent chamber glowing with soft light. "We cannot ignore this," one member said sharply. "Her influence is spreading. If we allow this, we risk destabilizing not just the station but entire worlds." Another council member shook their head, voice quieter but firm. "We have underestimated the humans. Their presence is not violent, not invasive, yet it challenges every principle we hold. We cannot contain it with force. We can only observe." Orders were sent to contain the situation, but as the security units approached the docking chamber, they hesitated. The alien woman stood calmly in the center, fully aware of the approaching threat. She was no longer frozen in fear. She had chosen a path that was unfamiliar, dangerous, yet profoundly liberating. For the first time, she was acting for herself, not for her people's rules. The humans did not move to defend themselves. Eric Vale stepped forward slightly, hands raised in peace. Commander Rhea and the rest of the crew mirrored his stance. They were unarmed, unthreatening, yet resolute. The very presence of calm sincerity was more powerful than any weapon, more dangerous than any attack. The alien woman spoke, her voice steady and clear. "I will not return to the old ways. I will not obey the dictates that deny me this awareness. I choose to feel. I choose to see. I choose to exist." A ripple of shock passed through the approaching units. Such defiance, once unthinkable, was now being articulated openly. Protocol had failed. Discipline had faltered. The human influence was no longer subtle, it was undeniable, and it was contagious. Eric stepped closer, careful not to intimidate, careful to respect the fragile line she had chosen to walk. "You are not alone," he said softly. "We are here and we will not abandon you. We do not command, we do not force. We only offer understanding." Her eyes, once guarded and analytical, now reflected something new: trust, curiosity, and courage. She had never experienced anything like it. The human presence did not demand obedience, yet it had opened doors she had never imagined could exist. In the council chamber, tension reached its peak. "This is unacceptable," one member said. "She defies not only our orders but the principles of our civilization. We must act now or risk losing control entirely." Another voice spoke, calm but insistent. "Perhaps this is what we have feared and what we have needed. The humans show us that choice, recognition, and emotion are not weaknesses, but a form of power. If we suppress it, we lose not only our people, but the opportunity to evolve." The debate raged on, but the alien woman no longer waited for permission. She had felt the human influence, embraced it, and chosen to follow it. She moved to the station's central observation deck, where she could see the stars and the human ship beyond. The blue star glimmered in the distance, a symbol of continuity, change, and possibility. Humans began to share more of their culture openly. Stories, music, images of their worlds, and glimpses of their daily lives. Each act of sharing was a lesson in connection. The alien woman absorbed it all, understanding for the first time that knowledge alone did not define a species. Connection, empathy, and choice were equally important. Others in her society began to take notice. Small gestures of curiosity appeared: a technician lingering over a human display, an engineer pausing to listen to a song, a scholar questioning long-held beliefs. The influence of the humans was subtle but unstoppable. It was not coercion, not threat, not fear. It was awakening. The council realized that their attempts at control had failed. The humans were not attacking, not demanding, not manipulating. They were simply being themselves, and in doing so, they had created a force the council could not ignore. The alien woman felt fear, yes, but also exhilaration. Every choice she made now carried weight, not only for herself but for the potential change in her society. She understood the stakes. She understood the risk. But she also understood something more profound. Freedom was worth any danger. Eric watched her carefully, understanding the complexity of her decision. "You are discovering yourself," he said quietly, "and in doing so, you are teaching others. You are showing them that choice, recognition, and courage are strengths." She nodded, her gaze steady on the stars. "I have been taught to fear feeling, but now I see that fear was never the answer. Feeling, connection, it is power." Across the station, the humans and the alien woman began to work together, exploring new possibilities. They exchanged knowledge, shared experiences, and built bridges between their species. Each day brought subtle but undeniable change. The council, initially fearful, now faced an impossible decision. They could attempt to suppress the awakening, risking rebellion and further chaos. Or they could embrace it, acknowledging that the human influence had created an opportunity for evolution. The alien woman took another step, fully aware of the path she had chosen. She had moved from fear to understanding, from obedience to agency, from suppression to awakening. And in doing so, she had begun to reshape the future of her society. The humans continued to demonstrate their philosophy: strength through empathy, power through understanding, and influence through presence rather than coercion. The alien woman learned quickly, applying these lessons in ways her species had never imagined. She began to see that recognition of individuality, encouragement of curiosity, and openness to emotion could coexist with tradition, discipline, and responsibility. She became a symbol, a living example of what her society could become if it embraced change rather than fear. The humans had not imposed their will. They had not demanded obedience. They had only offered possibility, and she had chosen to follow it. The council watched in awe and fear as the ripple of change spread. Entire sectors of the station began to question long-held rules. Scholars debated the value of emotion. Technicians experimented with human techniques. Citizens of the station began to explore their own suppressed feelings, curious about the possibilities they had never been allowed to consider. The humans' presence was no longer a threat. It had become a catalyst, a mirror reflecting what had been hidden, denied, or forgotten. The alien woman's choice had inspired others, ignited curiosity, and awakened a society that had long been dormant. In a quiet moment, the alien woman stood with Eric, looking out at the stars. "I understand now," she said softly. "I understand why you value connection, why you speak freely, why you see beauty in others. It is strength, and it is necessary." Eric smiled, a gentle expression that conveyed both pride and understanding. "It is not just strength," he replied. "It is humanity, and it is something worth sharing." The blue star cast its light across the station, illuminating faces that were no longer fearful, no longer rigid but curious and open. The ripple of change had begun, and there was no turning back. The alien woman felt a surge of hope. For the first time in her life, she understood that fear was not the path to survival. Choice, recognition, and courage were, and she was ready to embrace it fully. The humans prepared to depart, their mission complete but their influence permanent. They had not conquered, coerced, or manipulated. They had awakened, and the alien woman, standing at the edge of her society, would carry that awakening forward. As the human ship slipped into the vastness of space, leaving behind a society forever changed, the alien woman made her decision. She would not return to the old ways. She would remain among the humans, learning, growing, and helping her people navigate the possibilities that had been opened by connection and choice. The council could no longer ignore the truth. Humans were powerful not because of weapons or strategy, but because of empathy, patience, and sincerity. They had shown that the greatest strength lay not in control, but in understanding. And across the galaxy, civilizations would remember this moment, not as a battle, not as a conquest, but as the awakening of a people who had forgotten the power of feeling. The humans had whispered, and a society had listened. The alien woman, once frozen by fear and discipline, now stood free. She had chosen herself, chosen life, chosen possibility, and in doing so she had changed the course of history. The stars stretched endlessly before her, and for the first time she saw them with new eyes, eyes that could feel, choose, and hope. And somewhere in the quiet, the human voice that had started it all whispered again, "You're beautiful." This time she did not freeze. She smiled.